Hello, this is teacher Agbanyaga. Before I commence this teaching, I would like to greet all my subscribers out there, regardless of which continent you live on. I must say, it has been a while since I published a video on my channel. However, I have had the time to put together this teaching that will bring to your consciousness that the genuine Ancient Eʋes never practiced a religion of any form, but rather they had their own spiritual system by way of knowing who they were and by way of consciousness. In this video, I walk you through their spiritual system and how it was distorted by the European missionaries as part of their military agenda and by which defeat mechanisms they adopted. If you find this teaching useful, please like it and share it. Thank you. The ancient Eʋes, who left behind the Ewe language, clearly told us that spirituality comes with every human born on earth that came out of their mother's womb, regardless of their creed, race, color, tribe, or ethnicity. The ancient Eʋes knew that once a child is out of his or her mother's womb, that child is connected to an umbilical cord called Fufuli. According to them, the native doctor then cuts the umbilical cord to separate the baby from his mother. He then spanked the child on his back part to cause life to surge through the body of the baby. This is what the native ancient Eʋes referred to as Eʋe, or life in the English language. In other words, it means that at that point, the baby is in connection with his spiritual power. In essence, this is referred to as the child's indwelling divine spiritual birthright that was given to him or her at the time of birth by the higher power of creation, who used the mother and father as a divine instrument or vessel to bring the child forth to the world as a human being. The umbilical cord that was cut would then be given to the parents of the child to bury at a location known to themselves. Wofofolike, meaning the foundation of your umbilical cord, which will later on be shown to the child as he or she matures into life. Once that life and indwelling spirit is flowing through the child, the parents and elders begin to teach that child about another umbilical cord that took place, but it was invincible, which they refer to as ta, or what some people call today as the pineal gland or the third eye. Wotanefa, which means your personal universe must be peaceful if you are to achieve anything in life. At the bottom of the ta or the pineal gland are the nostrils of the child, which he or she uses to intake air, called ya or aya in the Ewe language, to keep the Eʋe or life or the indwelling spirit inside of the child alive. This is his spiritual or personal universe, which he confidently referred to as Nyagbogbo, because the child was taught that he or she has to breathe in order to be able to connect to the master universe called Mawu, which has no beginning and no ending. Once the child was taught and understood how to connect his spirituality to Mawu by way of Ta or the spiritual gland, which served as a conduit and served as a receiver and projector between him and Mawu, he was able to do anything he wanted to for himself or aspire to be in life. To achieve anything, he was also taught to revere and be able to be in tune and especially align his aspirations with the various nature spirits in his own immediate environment. And these spirits or native spirits are called Vodou, because these nature spirits are independent of Mawu and are not subordinates. During ancient times, the deity that ranked first in the spiritual system of the Ewe-speaking people is called Mawu. Although the word Mawu is a proper name, it actually means the Master Universe, which has no beginning and no end. The name originated from Wu, meaning infinite or limitless force, and strictly speaking, this higher power was no other than the indwelling spirits of the firmament or heavens, comprising the sky, the sun, the moon, the planet, and rain. The ancient Ewe-speaking people regarded Mawu as the most powerful force or a higher power. They were secretly in tune with this higher power. However, they also believed that Mawu was not a supreme source of creation, as they could not tell what created this principal force they called Mawu. Although Mawu to them was the principal force, this force was but one of the many independent natural forces. The ancient native Eğes did not know how the moon, the sky, the stars, the vegetations, and earth and human beings first came about into existence, so they attributed these as mysteries of life, for they themselves, the Eʋe people, were part of creation in creations. For the native Ewe-speaking people who were not subjected to European influence, distinctly told us that Mawu, though the most powerful, was simply one of the many deities, each of whom was perfectly independent in his or her own domain and subject to no control whatever. The genuine native idea was that each deity was quite independent of every other and free to act as he or she wished. For example, Eʋe was struck with lightning, Zapata dispersed illness, and Legba stimulated sexual desires without any reference or subordination to Mawu or any other deity. Hence it was that the ancient native Eğes deemed it necessary to worship every deity to whose action he or she was exposed. For to offer sacrifice to one or two only would not guarantee an individual from the consequences of the anger of those deities he or she had neglected. This is the reason why today we still see the worship of several nature spirits called Vodou among the native Ewe people. It is in this fact that the Eves, even in present times, pay particular attention to Vodou, even though Christian missionaries tried their best to wipe it out. In fact, the agenda failed successfully because Vodou has survived the test of time against all odd doctrines. But though Mau was considered the most powerful of all the deities, sacrifices were never directly offered to this principal force and prayer rarely. Actually, Mau was ignored rather than worshipped. The ancient native Eʋes explained this by saying that this master universe was too distant to trouble about other creations and their affairs, and they believed that this principal force remained in a blissful condition of perpetual peacefulness, the pinnacle of perfect bliss, and was uninterested in earthly matters. Due to this belief, sacrifices were never offered to Mau. To the native ancient Eʋes, Mau worked no evil to no one and was never interested in the welfare of anyone, so there was never a need to pacify or appease this principal force or master universe. Whereas there were so many other deities who either worked evil and had to be appeased, or were special guardians and had to be praised. The fact is, Mau was clearly not interested in anyone's affairs, as clearly stated by the genuine ancient Eʋes. It is well known that this is not the common view held by the Christianized native Eʋe people, because the distortion of the true conception of Mau has been passed down from generations to modern generations. The idea that Mau is the master of the earthly forces who are subordinate to her control came from the views of German missionaries who at the time were dwelling in the Gold Coast and tried so hard to discover what the spiritual systems of the ancient native Eʋes really were. Some of these German missionaries even went further to allude that Mau created the other earthly forces. The ancient native Eʋes, who occupied the seacoast settlement and who throughout most of their lives were in contact with Europeans, became accustomed with the European concept of a creator and supreme God, which was imposed on them, of which they passed on to generations or to their children. Thus far, it is obvious that due to European influence, the more original conception of Mau was altered and sadly lost in practice today. The genuine ancient Eʋes never mentioned the name of Mau in vain, because the higher powers of this master universe was sacred to them. Today, the name of Mau is particularly mentioned in vain and in a distorted manner in churches, shrine, temples, for these observers or modern observers don't even know that Mau is not interested if we are to go by the original concept left behind by the ancient native Eʋes. Christianized natives and natives who were much in contact with Europeans who settled along the coastal areas in the then Gold Coast or Slave Coast had absolutely confused the Jewish God Jehovah with Mau, whereas Roman Catholic missionaries who imagined Mau to be a surviving recollection of Jehovah translated in Eʋe as Yehovah. For this reason, these Roman Catholic missionaries, with their sinister agenda, went as far to term themselves as Mauno, meaning priest of Mau in English, in opposition to Voduno, in English as priest of voodoo or priest of nature spirits. But then, Protestant missionaries were more cautious and largely translated Mau as the unknown God. This shared mistake obviously happened naturally. European missionaries somehow illogically believed that their God dwells in the sky. They also believed that he controlled the rainfalls, and they addressed prayers to him for rain. The Christian idea that their God dwelled in the heavens was used by missionaries to Christianize the naive native Ancient Eʋes. These natives, on learning that the God of whom the Europeans or missionaries largely spoke had the same dwelling place and had some functions as Mau, very naturally concluded that Jehovah was only a foreign name for Mau, while the missionaries, by a similar process, conceived Mau to be an obscure recollection of Jehovah or Yehovah. This blending together of Mau and Jehovah was one of the main factors that lured thousands, if not millions, of Ancient Eʋes to yield to Christianity, which they knew nothing about. Once upon a time, it was not your time, it was not my time, and it was not our time. Eʋe Senanu, a native Ancient Eʋe, converted to Christianity, did not any the less believe in the existence of the deities of his own country land anymore. On the contrary, he was convinced that they were absolute objects or articles, a belief which some of the missionaries shared and propagated to him. Only instead of calling them deities or voodoo, he called them as devils and demons. And instead of sacrificing to them, he relied upon Mau, alias Jehovah or Yehovah, to protect him from their machinations. While all went well for Eʋe Senanu, he remained in this state of mind, but directly one day he met with misfortune and ill health. Then unavoidably it recurred to him the dormant notion of Mau's indifference to human beings. In other words, Mau was never interested in any human's affairs. And then Mr. Senanu or Eʋe Senanu attributed this misfortune or sickness to one of the god devils. He thought it would only be wise to appease the devil god by a little sacrifice and worship. Eʋe Senanu called in a native priest or boko and then performed what he had to do. In the end, the setback was set to resolved by the boko or the native priest. In present times, if you go to the land regions in West Africa, where the most Ewe-speaking people are, these places are dotted with several Christian churches of all denominations, planted by the European missionaries in the past, continued by the Africans themselves, as well as all other forms of foreign religions, where the name of Mau is praised through songs, prayers, and worship daily inside of these grand buildings and mosques. However, the genuine Ancient Eʋes who came up with the true conception or concept of Mau never worshipped this higher force in any form and never built a temple for Mau, although being the principal deity. This brings me to the end of this teaching. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe if you enjoy the video. Thank you again.